Okay, so this lesson focuses on solving rational equations. Now, in previous lessons, you looked at rational expressions and recall what a rational expression looked like. So these are examples of rational expressions. All right, so remember in the past, in previous lessons, you had to multiply rational expressions, you had to divide rational expressions, you had to add and subtract, and then you simplified rational expressions. So examples of rational expressions would be something like x plus 1 divided by 3. So basically it looks like a fraction, right? And then in this case you have at least one part of this fraction that contains a variable expression. But it doesn't always have to contain variables. 3/4 is considered a rational expression. It's a rational number, but it's still a rational expression. Um, x plus 5 divided by 2x plus 10, that's a rational expression. All right. Now remember what you did in this case in a previous lesson was you simplified this, so you had to factor the denominator. Okay. So those are examples of rational expressions. Now a rational equation is an equation containing rational expressions. All right, so an equation containing rational expressions. So for example, 3 divided by 5 plus 2 divided by x equals 6. That's a rational equation, all right? Because you have at least one rational expression. All these terms, see those three terms? 1, 2, 3. Those are rational expressions. 3/5, 2 divided by x, even 6, because I can write 6 as 6 over 1, right? So those are rational equations. Now, what you want to do is, in this case, is you're going to be solving these rational equations. Now, to solve a rational equation, you're going to follow these steps. All right, so these are the steps to solving a rational equation. So step one is you're going to factor your denominators. All right, so that's step one. Step one is to factor. Then what I would do in step two is you're going to find any restrictions. I'm going to talk about what that means in a little while. All right, then step three is multiply both sides of the equation by the LCD. So part of step three is to find the LCD. Once you find the LCD, you're going to multiply both sides by it. Okay, and then step four is you're going to solve the equation, and almost all times you're going to be using grouping. You will have grouping symbols. And then step four is check to see if the solution from step four is a restriction. And then step five, as always check your solution, because you could have made a mistake somewhere in the process of solving the equation. Okay? All right, so we're going to go back over these steps in a little while. Now, let me remind you about the LCD. So one of the steps involves finding the LCD, right? So let's kind of remind ourselves about how to find the LCD. So let's find the LCD. Find the LCD of the following. All right, so let's suppose I had these two rational expressions. All right, now listen carefully to this. So those are my two rational expressions, x divided by x plus 6, and the other one is 7 divided by 3x plus 18. Remember when you added and subtracted rational expressions? When you add and subtract, what was one of the things you had to do? You had to find the LCD, because you had to write equivalent fractions. Remember that? So when finding the LCD, we got to first of all factor. Can I factor this denominator? Remember, you're factoring your denominators. Can I factor the denominator? No. The GCF is 1, and so that's all I can do is just leave it as x plus 6. But here, the GCF is 3, so I can factor out a 3. So I get 3 times x plus 6, right? And then you went, in that lesson where you had to add and subtract, then you went and you had to find the LCD. Well, the LCD, remember, must include every factor you see. The LCD has to include every factor you see. So the factor I see here is x plus 6. I must use it. So I'm going to put that in parentheses. Then I go to the next fraction. The first factor I see is 3. I must use it. Then I go to the next factor, x plus 6. I already have it, and that's all the factors I see. I have 1, 2, 3 factors all together, and my LCD then will be this. Now don't list x plus 6 again. Do not list x plus 6 again. So notice the LCD, remember, is not 3 times x plus 6 times x plus 6. That's a common denominator, but it's not the least. All right, so it's not the least. So that's your least. So x plus 6, I already have it. X plus 6, I already have it. You're done. So that's your LCD. Okay? All right, so let's look at this example. Let's actually go and do this one here. Let's use this one. So let's solve the first one. So number 1, so solve each rational equation. All right, number 1. We have 3 divided by 5 plus 2 divided by x equals 6, right? Okay. So remember, the first thing you have to do is factor your denominators. So if you look at 5, well, that's just a number, right? So I'm going to leave it alone. Then I go here, x, I can't factor that. X is x. And then here, that's 6 over 1, correct? So your LCD then, remember what we said, it has to include every factor. So here's a factor, I must use it. I'm not going to put in parentheses because it's a monomial. And then here's my next factor, x, I must use it. That's a 1. So I'm not going to put times 1 because it's understood to be, this right here always is understood to be a fact, to include the factor of 1. So there's your LCD. All right, so I found the LCD. Then the next thing you got to do is find the restrictions, and that's going to be important in some of our problems. Find the restrictions. So what I mean by that is where is the rational expression undefined? That's what I mean. Where is the rational expression undefined? So remember, undefined means you cannot divide by 0. You can't have 0 in the denominator. Well, that's a 5, so that's never 0. But when is this denominator 0? When x is 5? No. When x is 4? No, because that's 4. When x is 2? No. So when x is what? 0. So my restriction, your restriction is that x cannot equal 0. All right? So x cannot equal 0. All right? And that 6 over 1, that's always a 1. So that's never going to be 0. But this can be 0. I'm sorry. This can be undefined when the denominator is 0. All right, so I found my LCD, I found my restriction, and now I'm going to multiply both sides by the LCD. The whole purpose of multiplying a rational equation by the LCD is to get these denominators to be 1s, and you're going to see that's going to happen. You want these denominators to be 1s. Now, see how I have 2 fractions on the left? Put that in parentheses. You must put in parentheses. So 3/5 plus 2 divided by x in parentheses times 5x equal 6 times 5x. So what you do to one side, you do to the other. So notice step 3. I'm multiplying both sides by the LCD. This by the LCD, this by the LCD. So this side by the LCD, notice there are 2 here, so you must put in parentheses, and that's important. Since that's only one term, I'm not going to put in parentheses. Let me just leave it like that. So when you have 2 or more terms, put in parentheses. And then step 4 is to solve the equation. All right, so notice I have grouping symbols now, so I'm going to distribute. And so I get 5x times 3/5 plus 5x times 2 over x, right? Equal, and then 6 times 5x is 30x. Y'all agree? All right, now I'm going to reduce. Part of step 4, solving the equation by removing grouping symbol, is now you have something from a previous lesson where you have to reduce. 5 into 5 is 1. 5 into 5 is 1. Remember our discussion? The whole purpose of multiplying by the LCD is to get these denominators to be 1s. It's now a 1. All right, so you got to make sure that your LCD, if I'm going to get this to be a 1, then that has to be in the LCD, and it is. So I'm left with 1 times x times 3x is 3x, right? Plus, over here, the x's divide out, so I'd get 5 times 1 times 2 is 10, equal 30x. So notice that in part 1 of our lesson, we're always going to go from a rational equation to a linear. Now, that's just in part 1 for us right now. Rational equation to linear. So that's a linear equation now. All right, so let's solve this linear equation. So to solve this linear equation, we're bring all the variables to one side. So I get minus 3x, minus 3x. So I get 10 equal 27x. And then divide both sides by 27. I get x to be 10 divided by 27. So that's your solution. Now, let me say this though. We still need to go to step 4. So I'm going to call this right now my proposed solution, because that is a solution to the linear equation, but this was a rational equation. That rational equation is not this linear equation. So this is a solution to this, but we got to check and see if it's a solution to this. Now, if you do the work correctly, if all your algebras correctly, then what you got here is going to be correct. You just have to really check and see if it's your restriction. So I can't use 0. So is that 0? No, that's 1027. So it should work. It should work as long as you did your work correct. So let's check it. Let's check. All right, you must always go back to the original. 3/5 plus 2 divided by x equals 6, right? So I get 3/5 plus 2 divided by x. X is 10 over 27, just like this. And I want to see if that's going to equal 6, right? All right, now here's how you can use your calculator with this. So you're going to say 3/5, 3 divided by 5, right? Plus 2 divided by, now what I would do here is I would put this in parentheses, because that's a fraction. So I'm going to say in parentheses 10 divided by 27, close the parentheses, and then press equal. And hopefully I'm going to get a 6. And I got 6. So that's correct. All right. So 10/27 is a solution. All right, number 2. Okay, so number 2, let's suppose you had, let's say you had 4 divided by x minus 3 plus 6 equal -1 divided by x minus 3. Okay, so let's suppose I had that. So notice I have this rational equation, correct? I have this rational equation, and I have to solve this rational equation. Now remember, step 1 is to factor your denominators. Well, if you notice, I now have 3 fractions, right? So this denominator is x minus 3. I can't factor it. It's prime. GCF is 1. Here, that's 6 over 1. That's a number, so I can't factor that one. And then this we already talked about, so that's x minus 3. So your your least common denominator has to include every factor you see. So I see an x minus 3, I must use it. This is a 1, so every LCD will incorporate this 1, so I'm not going to write it. And then x minus 3, I already have it listed. So there's your LCD. See, the LCD is x minus 3. Okay, now let's find the restrictions. The restrictions. All right, now you got to think about this. So you remember that your denominator, remember, in a rational expression, you can never divide by 0. All right, now notice this rational expression here, that's 6 over 1. That's always going to be a 1, so that's never 0. But this can be 0. When is this 0? When x is what number? What number minus 3 is 0? So basically you're asking yourself, x minus 3 equals 0, so x is what? 3. So 3 makes it 0. So my restriction is that x cannot equal 3. All right, because if x is 3, well, I get 4 over what? 0, and that's undefined. When x is 3, I get -1 over 0. That's undefined. All right, so that was your step 2. You have to find the restriction. Now, step 3 is you're going to take that LCD you just found, and you multiply both sides by the LCD. The whole purpose of multiplying by the LCD is to get these denominators to be 1s. 1, 1, 1. That's the whole purpose. All right. So when you do that, you're going to go from a rational equation to a linear equation. It makes things so much easier for you to deal with. Okay. So we have to go through this process. So since this side has 2 fractions, I'm going to put that in parentheses. So put that in parentheses first. All right. And since this side is just 1 fraction, we'll leave it alone. So all I did was I rewrote this, and I put this side in parentheses since there were 2 fractions. That's important that you put that in parentheses. And so now I'm going to multiply both sides by the LCD. So I'm going to say x minus 3 and then x minus 3. So notice I put that in parentheses because it's needed here. It's not needed here. But that parentheses around x minus 3 is needed here. Okay, so now I'm going to clear the... So in step 4, I'm going to solve the equation. So notice I do have grouping symbols. So I'm using the distributive property. So I get x minus 3 times 4 divided by x minus 3. Now, notice I took the parentheses off. The reason why I took the parentheses off is because I know that right away I can reduce these. But if you could leave it on, that's fine. Leave it on if you want to. No big deal. But I do need it for this one because you're saying 6 times this, right? And so if you leave it like this, if you write it like this, 6 times that, the only thing that's being multiplied by 6 is x, and the whole thing should be multiplied by 6. So that's why I put that in parentheses. And then equal, and I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this over. All right, so go ahead and put them in parentheses. It helps. It helps, especially here, because if you didn't, you'd probably mess up. Now we're going to reduce. All right, we're going to reduce. So the x minus 3's divide out. And so notice, remember we said earlier, the whole purpose of multiplying by the LCD is to get these denominators to be 1s. Okay? So that's now a 1. So if I'm going to make this a 1, remember that has to be in the LCD. All right? And so now I get 1 times 4 is 4. And then I'm going to distribute this. So I get plus 6x, and then 6 times negative 3 is negative 18, equal. And then these divide out, right? And so I get negative 1 times 1 is negative 1. All right, so notice I have this linear equation. Okay, so now let's solve this linear equation. So I get 6x, 4 and a negative 18 is a negative 14, equal negative 1. Adding 14 to both sides, I get 6x equal 13, right? And so x is divided by 6, x is 13/6. All right. So if I did all of this work correct, and I'd made no algebraic error, then this, as long as it's not a restriction, remember, so is this 3? No. In a little while, you're going to see what's going to happen if this and this are the same. But if I did all this correct, then that should work. That's going to be a solution. So first of all, the next thing you want to do is check and see, step 4, check and see if the solution in step 4 is a restriction. So is this a restriction right here? No, because what's the restriction? 3. All right. So if I did this correct, then that's the solution. So let's check it. So you go back to the original. Always go back to the original because you could have made a mistake anywhere along the way. Always go back to the original. All right, so all I did was I rewrote the original. So again, wherever you see the variable x, I'm going to substitute 13/6. All right, now it looks complicated. So you might going to say, well, I'm not going to check it. It's a good idea to check it because you could have really made a mistake. All right, and negative 1 over 13/6 minus 3. Okay, now here's the way I would do this. See how this looks complicated? That's minus 3. Put that in parentheses. Since that's more than one fraction, put that in parentheses. All right, put in parentheses. I'm telling you, you really need it. Otherwise, you're going to make an error when you're going to use your calculator. All right, so let's check it. So 4 divided by parentheses 13 divided by 6 minus 1, close the parentheses, and then plus 6. Press equal, and I get something that's approximately equal to 9.429, right? All right, so hopefully this is approximately equal to that. So hopefully these two are the same, correct? Now remember, your calculator, guys, your calculator can change. See how this looks like it's a rational number. It's a rational number, but it doesn't terminate. So somewhere it starts repeating. See right here, 428571428. So 42, and then this is a 9, but that's because it rounded off. Your calculator, remember, can change this to a fraction. So see right above here where you see right above the PRB, F fraction to decimal, press this. Oops, I'm sorry, I forgot to put the, I forgot to put the, there we go. I got to press second first. Second, PRB, and then press equal. and you get 9 and 3/7. So this is 9 and 3/7. All right, now let's see if this is 9 and 3/7. So negative 1 divided by parentheses 13 divided by, 13 minus, 13 divided by 6 minus 3, close the parentheses, press equal. Oops, I did something wrong, so let's do it again. So negative 1 divided by parentheses 13 divided by 6 minus 3, close the parentheses, press equal. All right, I get 1.2. So something is wrong somewhere around here. I'm thinking I made an error somewhere. So let's just check this again. Let's just check it. So all the parts correct. So I said 4 plus 6x minus 18 is correct, and then minus 1. And then 4 and a negative 18 is a negative 14. So that's correct, 13.6. So maybe I made a mistake here. So let's do this one again. All right, so 4. All right, so 4 divided by, in parentheses, 13 divided by 6 minus 3, right? Close the parentheses and then say plus 6 equal. Okay, yeah, I did make a mistake. So that's 1.2. And so this is 1.2. So that works. All right, that works. I'm thinking that maybe I'll put this as a 1 instead of a 3, because that's a 3, right? Okay. All right, so that's your solution. All right, so that's number 2. Let's look at number 3. All right, number 3, let's suppose we had this one. Let's suppose we had 5x divided by x minus 1 equals 5 divided by x minus 1 plus 3. Okay, suppose we had that one. All right, so it's very similar to number 2, isn't it? So that's an easy one. You can deal with that. You can easily find the LCD. What's the LCD in number 3? So remember, the first thing you have to do, remember, is factor your denominators. Well, there's nothing to factor. This is x minus 1, this is x minus 1, and that's really 3 over 1, so that's 1. So what's your LCD? Your LCD is x minus 1. So your LCD has to include every factor in your denominator. So that's x minus 1, I have it. That's x minus 1, I have it. And that's 1. Well, your LCD, it always includes a factor of 1. So now, step 2 is to find the restrictions. Step 2, find the restriction. What makes this denominator 0? So you're asking yourself, where is x minus 1 equal to 0 when x is what? 1. So your restriction is that x cannot equal 1. Okay? Because 1 makes this denominator 0, right? So if x is 1, notice what happens. If x is 1, what's 5 times 1? 5. What's 1 minus 1? 0. What's 5 over 0? Undefined. Same thing here. What's 5 over 0? Undefined. Now this is never undefined because that's 3, but 1 makes at least one of these undefined. In this case, it makes both of these undefined. All right, so that's your restriction. Okay, now step 2. So step 2 is to multiply, step 3 rather. Step 3 is to multiply both sides by the LCD. Now you see how this has 2 fractions, this only has 1? I'm going to put this in parentheses. So notice every problem we've done, I had to use parentheses. Every problem we've done, I had to use parentheses. Okay? So make sure you use parentheses. So 5x divided by x minus 1 equal, and remember that you're going to use parentheses because there's more than one fraction here. So I'm going to put that in parentheses. Then you're going to multiply both sides by the LCD. So you're going to say times x minus 1 times x minus 1. So notice I put that in parentheses. It's important you put that in parentheses. Okay, so now we're in step 4. So step 4 is to solve. So I'm going to solve first of all by getting rid of the grouping symbols. So I'm going to distribute, right? So this I'm going to leave alone for right now. I'm going to leave that alone for right now. Okay, now let's distribute this. So I get x minus 1 times the first rational expression plus x minus 1 times 3. I'm going to put 3 in front. Okay, so this times this is this. Okay, now we're going to reduce. That's part of solving. So let's reduce. Remember, the whole purpose of multiplying by the LCD is to make these denominators what kind of numbers? 1. You want this to be a factor of 1. And these divide out now. So that's 1, that's 1. So 1 times 5x is 5x equal. These divide out. You have a factor of 1 now. 1 times 5 is 5. And then we're going to distribute this. So that becomes 3x minus 3, right? Okay, so notice I have this linear equation. So in all our examples in part 1, you're going to go from a rational equation to a linear equation. In all of our examples in part 1. Combine like terms, I get 5x equal 3x plus 2, right? Solving this linear equation, we bring the 3x to the other side, so I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. So I get 2x equal, this is 0, 0 plus 2 is 2. Divide both sides by 2, I get x to be 1. Okay, so x to be 1. Okay, now, so you found the solution. Now, see, x equal 1 is the solution to this linear equation. That's true. But remember, we're solving this rational equation. This rational equation is not this linear equation. It turned out into this linear equation, but this solution is a solution to this. It may not be a solution to this. That's why we have to look at our restrictions. So step 4 is you got to check to see if the solution you got in step 4 is a restriction. So is x equal 1 a restriction? Yes. So what that means is this. You remember in all our previous examples we checked? All right. So if you were to check, what that means is this. What that restriction means is this. If I check, go back to the original. I'm just rewriting the original over. And I substitute 1, notice what happens. I get 5 times 1 over 1 minus 1 equal 5 over 1 minus 1 plus 3, right? I want you to notice this. Here I get 5 over 0. Right away, that's undefined. So 1, even though 1 is a solution to this linear equation, it's not a solution to the original, to the rational equation, because it's a restriction. So your solution, you're going to say this. Your solution, you're going to say no solution. That's what you say, no solution. There is no solution because 1 is not a solution to the original, because it makes the original undefined. Okay? So you say no solution. All right. So number 4. Okay, so suppose in number 4 we had 2x divided by x minus 4 equal 8 divided by x minus 4 plus 1. Okay? All right, so same thing. That's an easy one. What's the LCD? First of all, factor. You can't factor any further. So the LCD is just x minus 4, right? X minus 4. So now we're going to multiply. Oh, let's find the restriction. So the restriction, what makes this 0? You're asking yourself, where is x minus 4 equals 0? Well, x minus 4 is equal 0 when x is 4, correct? So that's your restriction. X cannot equal 4. So now I'm going to multiply both sides by the LCD. This has 2 fractions, 2 rational expressions. I'm going to put that in parentheses. This only has 1. I'm not going to use parentheses. I'm not going to put in parentheses. All right, so I'm going to say times x minus. So the next step, so remember step 3 is you're going to multiply both sides by the LCD. So that's what I'm doing here. So I'm now multiplying both sides by that LCD. Make sure you put that LCD in parentheses. That's important, especially with one part here. Okay, so now I'm going to, step 4 is to solve the equation. So I'm going to remove grouping symbols. All right, so I'm just going to rewrite this over for right now. And then we distribute. So I get x minus 4 times 8 divided by x minus 4 plus, and then that's 1 times x minus 4, right? Okay. And now I'm going to reduce. So when you go back to all those 3 previous problems, notice at one point I reduced. Once I multiply both sides by this and I distribute it, the next step is to reduce. So remember, the whole purpose of multiplying by the LCD is to get this to be a 1, and it is because x minus 4 divides to x minus 4. And you're left with factors of 1. 1 times 2x is 2x equal. X minus 4 is divided out. 1 times 8 is 8. And then here I'm going to distribute. 1 times x minus 4 is just x minus 4. Okay, so notice I went from this rational equation to a linear equation. So in all our examples in part 1, this will be linear. So now combining like terms, I got 2x equal x at 8, and a negative 4 is a positive 4. Subtracting x from both sides, I get x equal 4. Okay, so that is, this right here is a solution to this linear equation, because look, what's 2 times 4? 8. What's 8 plus 4? 12. 12 minus 4 is 8. But it's not a solution to this one. Why not? Because 4 is a what? Restriction. So what do you say? You say no solution. No solution since x equal 4 is a restriction. Remember what that means. What does that mean? What does that mean that x equal 4 is a restriction? That means that it makes at least one of these rational expressions undefined, because x equal 4 makes at least one of the rational expressions undefined. And it does, because look, when x is 4, what's 8 over 4 minus 4? 0. So 8 divided by 0 is undefined. Same thing here. What's 2 times 4? 8. What's 4 minus 4? 0. What's 8 over 0? 0. Undefined, excuse me. Undefined. Okay? All right, let's do one more. All right, one more. And remember, that's part 1. And that's really all we're going to do with this is just part 1. Okay, so there's number 5. So number 5, let's suppose we had this. So let's suppose we had 4x divided by, let's say, x squared plus x minus 30 plus 2 divided by x minus 5 equal 1 divided by x plus 6. Okay, so let's suppose we had that. All right, so step 1, remember, is to factor your denominators. Now, this is at a situation where we can actually factor this denominator. See, that's x minus 5. I can't factor that. That's x plus 6. I can't factor that. The GCF is 1s in both cases. Here I can, though. So the GCF is 1, so I'm just go ahead and use the two binomials. So that's x, and I think 6 and 5, and plus a minus. And so if you fold this out, you see you get this back. So now let's find the LCD. So remember, the LCD must include every factor you see. So I see an x plus 6, I must use it. I see an x minus 5, I must use it. All right, so remember in our discussion, the whole purpose of multiplying by the LCD is to get these to be 1s, right? So if I want this denominator to become a 1, then that denominator must be in the LCD. So I'm going to ask you, if I want this denominator at some point to be a 1, this must be in the LCD. Do you see it? It is in the LCD, right? Okay. Now let's go to the next one. You must look at all your rational expressions. This is x minus 5. If I want this to be a 1, it must be in here. Is it? Yes. The next one's x plus 6. If I want this to be a 1, it must be in here. Is it? Yes. So that's your LCD. Okay. So now let's find the restrictions. All right. So just like we did before, you ask yourself, what makes these denominators zeros? All right. And so we kind of set up as an equation. So let's look at the factors, though. See this factor right here, x plus 6? What makes x plus 6 equal to 0? What makes x plus 6 equal to 0? When x is what? Negative 6. So that's one of your restrictions. X cannot equal negative 6. Let's look at the other one. What makes x minus 5 equal to 0? When x is what? 5. So that's your other restriction. So x cannot equal 6, negative 6, and x cannot equal positive 5. Let's go to the next one. What makes x minus 5 equal 0? I already did it, so I already have it listed. What makes x plus 6 equal to 0? I already did it. I already have it listed. So how many restrictions are there? 2. Notice that those 2 restrictions corresponds to your factors in your LCD. All right? So what makes this 0? 5. What makes this 0? Negative 6. So those are your restrictions. Okay, once you find your LCD and once you find your restrictions, the next step is to multiply both sides by the LCD. So you see on this side I have 2 fractions, 2 rational expressions. Put that in parentheses. Now listen carefully. Don't use x squared plus x minus 30. Use the factored part. Always use the factored part when rewriting. So here's what you're going to see me do. You're going to see me do this. 4x divided by x plus 6 times x minus 5. And the reason is because I'm going to have to multiply by the LCD, right? Well, the LCD is already in factored form in it. So use factored form. Plus 2 divided by x minus 5, put that in parentheses, equal, and then I don't have enough room here, so I'm going to put this right. I'll go ahead and do this and put this right here, 1 over x plus 6. So I need to put this in parentheses. So now I'm going to multiply both sides by the LCD. So x minus 5 times x plus 6, x minus 5 times x plus 6. All right? Okay, now we're going to distribute. Get rid of these grouping symbols right here. We're going to distribute. So I get the LCD times the first rational expression. So think of it like this. The LCD times this, the LCD times this. So x minus 5 times x plus 6 times the first rational expression, x plus 6 divided by x minus 5, plus the LCD times this, x minus 5 times x plus 6 times 2 divided by x minus 5 equal, I ran out of room, so I'm going to have to kind of do this, equal x minus 5 times x plus 6 times 1 over x plus 6. Okay? All right, now we reduce, right? We reduce. So remember, the whole purpose of multiplying by the LCD is to get these denominators to be 1s. And it will be, because the x plus 6's divide out, the x minus 5's divide out. So it's 1 times 4x, 4x. Plus, here the x minus 5's divide out, right? So you get 2 times what? X plus 6. Now make sure you put it like this. Do it like this. 2. So this, 1 times x plus 6 times 2 is 2 times x plus 6. Equal. The x plus 6 is divide out. So you get 1 times x minus 5, right? All right. And now we can distribute again. Now that one you could have just said x minus 5, because 1 times x minus 5 is x minus 5. Okay, so I get 4x plus 2x plus 12, right? Equal. And then that's just x minus 5. So notice I went from a rational equation to a linear equation, right? And so now I'm solving this linear equation. Okay, combining like terms, I get 6x plus 12 equals x minus 5. Subtracting x from both sides, I get 5x plus 12 equals a negative 5. Subtracting 12 from both sides, I get 5x equal negative 17. And then divide both sides by 5, I get x to be negative 17 fifths. Okay? All right, so I think I did all the algebra correct, right? Did you see any errors as I went through? I don't think there were any errors, right? So all I really need to do is check and see if that's a restriction. So is negative 17 fifths one of my restrictions? No, because your restrictions are negative 6 and 5. So that means this. That means that if I actually did all this algebra correct, then this is going to work. But I could have made an error in the algebra, right? So let's check it. Let's just check. All right, go back to the original. Go back to the original. Always go back to the original. Now, when you go back to the original, make sure you use the original that you see on paper. So that's 4x divided by x squared plus x minus 30 plus 2 divided by x minus 5 equal 1 divided by x plus 6. All right, so where we see an x, I'm going to substitute negative 17 fifths, okay? So now this is going to be complicated. You see the original problem is complicated, and now you have a fraction, so that's going to make it even more complicated. But think about what we did in the previous problem, in one of our previous problems. So I'm going to have 4 times negative 17 fifths, so where we see an x, you substitute this, divided by, so I'm going to put bracket here, divided by bracket, x is negative 17 fifths, that's 17 fifths, negative 17 fifths squared, plus a negative 17 fifths, and then minus 30, right? Okay, plus 2 divided by negative 17 fifths minus 5, equal, I'm going to see if that's going to equal 1 divided by negative 17 fifths plus 6. So you're probably losing your mind saying, oh my Lord, what do I do here? Well, it's not that bad. What I would do is this. Let's just take it in steps. Look at the numerator first. So let's just think about the numerator. So use your calculator. 4 times, in parentheses, negative 17 fifths, right? Equal. I get this decimal, but we all know how to convert a rational expression to a fraction, to a mixed number. We can use our function here. So second PRB, press equal, and that's negative 13.6. So that's your numerator, negative 13.6, right? Okay. Let's look at the denominator. All right, so that may be a little bit more complicated, so be careful. So I'm clearing this up, so I'm going to put parentheses, negative 17 fifths, 17 divided by 5. You're going to close it because you're squaring it. Okay, so that is this, plus parentheses, negative 17 fifths, close the parentheses, minus 30, and then press equal. So I get this, right? So I get negative 21.84. Y'all agree? Okay. Now let's go to the next fraction. 2 divided by, all right, let's talk about the denominator. Negative 17 fifths minus 5 equal negative 8.4, right? And I want to see if that's going to equal. Now let's look at this. That's 1 divided by, all right, negative 17 fifths, negative 17 fifths, plus 6 equal 2.6. All right, so that's where I'm at. Okay, so let's look at, so basically now all I need to do is just do what I see. So it's easy now. It's easy. Just look at your calculator. Watch. The first numerator, so negative 13.6 divided by a negative 21.84 plus 2 divided by a negative 8.4 equal, and so now what I would do at this point, see how it doesn't terminate? So I'm just going to go ahead and do this. Second PRB, press equal, and I get 5/13. So I get 5/13. So this is 5/13. All I have to do is see if this is 5/13. 1 divided by 2.6 equal, all right, let's see what that is. 5/13. So it works out. Okay? All right, so yeah, I know it's complicated. So what some students, to be honest, what some students do is they don't even check. They don't check. They're just assuming that they did all this work correct, got to this point, and all they do is check and see if that's a restriction, your restriction. If it's not, we're good to go. but you could have easily made a mistake somewhere along the way. So if you have the time, and if you're not too freaked out about using this calculator with all these fractions, use your calculator. Just check it. All right, so that's number 5. Let's actually do, well, no, we're good. So because we're already at 45 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and close this lesson. So in this lesson, remember the whole point was to solve rational equations. All right, to solve a rational equation, go through all these steps. All right, so that was part 1.